The clock on the wall showed 11:45 p.m. when Robert pushed his cleaning cart down the long marble hallway. His shoes squeaked slightly against the polished floor, the only sound in the otherwise silent building. At 62 years old, he had been cleaning these offices for 15 years now. Every night, same routine, same floors, same people who barely noticed he existed. But tonight was different. Tonight, the lights were still blazing on the 47th floor of Henderson & Associates, one of the biggest law firms in Chicago. Robert had seen late nights before, sure. Lawyers worked crazy hours, but this was the third night in a row that the main conference room had been lit up, like a Christmas tree well past midnight. Something big was happening. As he got closer to the conference room, he could hear voices, frustrated voices, angry voices, the kind of voices people use when everything is going wrong and nobody knows how to fix it. Through the glass walls, Robert could see them. 10 lawyers, all dressed in expensive suits even at this late hour, huddled around a massive table that was covered in papers and laptops and empty coffee cups. The woman at the head of the table looked like she was in charge. Her name was Catherine Henderson, though Robert only knew that because he'd seen it on the nameplate outside her corner office. She was the senior partner, the big boss, the one who made the decisions, and right now she looked absolutely miserable. Robert had learned a long time ago to keep his head down and do his job. Janitors were meant to be invisible, especially in places like this. These lawyers made more money in an hour than he made in a month. They lived in a different world. They didn't see people like him as real people, just as part of the background, like the furniture or the walls. He started his cleaning routine in the hallway outside the conference room, emptying trash cans and wiping down the water fountain. But he couldn't help hearing bits and pieces of their conversation. They'd been talking about the same thing for 3 nights now, and even though Robert didn't understand most of it, he could tell they were in serious trouble. "This is impossible," one of the younger lawyers said, throwing his pen down on the table. "We've gone through every document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. The math just doesn't work." "The math has to work," Catherine snapped back. "We go to trial in 3 days. 3 days, and we still can't explain how they filed that patent before the theft supposedly happened." Robert kept wiping down surfaces, moving slowly, trying to understand what they were talking about. Something about patents and theft and timestamps. It sounded complicated, like most things lawyers dealt with. "Maybe we should just ask for another delay," suggested a woman with glasses. "Tell the judge we need more time to investigate." "We can't," Catherine said, and Robert could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Judge Morrison already denied 2 continuances. If we ask again, he'll sanction us. He'll fine the firm. And worse, he might dismiss the case entirely. Whitmore Industries loses $400 million and our reputation goes down with it." $400 million. Robert almost whistled, then caught himself. That was more money than he could even imagine. No wonder everyone looked so stressed. He moved closer to the conference room door, his cartwheels squeaking slightly. The lawyers were so wrapped up in their problem that they didn't even glance his way. He might as well have been a ghost. "Let's go through it one more time," Catherine said, rubbing her temples like she had a terrible headache. "Maybe we missed something." One of the lawyers pulled up a document on his laptop and projected it onto the big screen on the wall. Robert could see it clearly from where he stood in the hallway, even though he wasn't supposed to be paying attention. "Okay," the lawyer said. "Here's what we know. Whitmore Industries claims that Chen Technologies stole their secret manufacturing process. They say Chen's engineers hacked into Whitmore's computer system and downloaded confidential documents. Then Chen used that stolen information to create their own version and filed a patent for it." "Right," Catherine said. "And we have proof of the hack. We have server logs showing that someone from Chen's company accessed Whitmore's system and downloaded the exact file that contained their manufacturing secrets." "So what's the problem?" asked another lawyer, though from his tone Robert could tell he already knew the answer. "The problem," Catherine said slowly, like she was explaining it to a child, "is the timing. According to our evidence, Chen filed their patent application at 3:47 p.m. on March 15th, 2023. That's a fact. It's in the patent office records. But according to Whitmore's server logs, the theft didn't happen until 4:05 p.m. that same day, 18 minutes later. The room went quiet for a moment while everyone processed that. "So they filed the patent before they stole the information," the young lawyer said, "which means they couldn't have used the stolen information to create the patent." "Exactly," Catherine said, which means our entire case falls apart. We can't prove theft if the patent was filed before the theft happened. It makes no sense. Chen's lawyers will tear us apart in court. Robert finished with the water fountain and moved his cart closer to the conference room door. He needed to empty their trash cans anyway. Might as well get it over with. There has to be an explanation, one of the lawyers insisted. Maybe the server logs are wrong. Maybe someone changed the timestamps. We had 3 different tech experts examine those logs, Catherine replied. They all confirm the timestamps are accurate and haven't been tampered with. The theft happened at 4:05 p.m. That's locked in. Then maybe the patent office records are wrong. Federal patent records? Those are even more secure than bank records. There's no way those are wrong either. Robert paused in the hallway, his hand on the cart handle. Something about this conversation was nagging at him, pulling at a memory from long ago. Something about timestamps and computer systems and manufacturing plants. We've been working on this for 6 weeks, another lawyer said. 6 weeks, hundreds of hours, and we're no closer to solving it than we were on day 1. Maybe it really is impossible. It can't be impossible, Catherine said firmly. Whitmore didn't make this up. Chen really did steal their information. We know that. We just can't prove it because of this timing issue. Robert took a deep breath and pushed his cart toward the conference room door. Time to empty their trash. Time to be invisible again. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. There was something here. Something important, something these smart lawyers with their fancy degrees and expensive suits were missing. He knocked quietly on the glass door, though it was already open. Nobody looked up. He pushed his cart inside, the wheels making their familiar squeaking sound against the floor. 10 lawyers kept talking, kept arguing, kept trying to solve their impossible problem, and Robert, the 62-year-old janitor who nobody ever noticed, who'd been invisible for 15 years, started picking up their trash and empty coffee cups. His mind was working, though, turning over that old memory, trying to figure out why this whole situation felt so familiar. He'd seen something like this before, years ago, back when he had a different job, a different life, back before he became invisible. The answer was right there, just out of reach. And in a few minutes, Robert was going to do something he'd never done before in 15 years of cleaning these offices. He was going to speak up. Robert moved slowly around the conference room, collecting crumpled papers and empty coffee cups. His hands worked automatically, muscle memory from 15 years of the same routine. But his mind was somewhere else entirely, reaching back through the years to a time when he wore a different uniform, and people actually listened when he spoke. The lawyers kept arguing, their voices getting louder and more frustrated with each passing minute. They were talking in circles now, going over the same points again and again. The patent was filed at 3:47 p.m. The theft happened at 4:05 p.m. 18 minutes that made no sense. 18 minutes that were about to cost someone $400 million. We could argue that Chen had inside information before the hack, one lawyer suggested. Maybe they had a mole at Whitmore who gave them the details earlier. We already investigated that angle, another lawyer replied, shaking his head. Whitmore's security is tight. No one left the company in the 6 months before the patent filing. No suspicious communications. Nothing. Robert reached for an empty water bottle near where Catherine Henderson was sitting. His hand paused halfway there as that old memory suddenly became clearer. It was coming back to him now, bit by bit. The manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 20 years. The computer systems, the problems they'd had every spring and fall. What about time zones? Someone asked. Could there be a time zone issue? Both companies are in the same time zone, came the tired response. Eastern Standard Time, we already checked that. Robert picked up the water bottle and a few napkins, moving to the trash can by the door. He should leave. He should just finish his job and get out of their way. These were important people dealing with important problems. What could a janitor possibly add to this conversation? But then he thought about his nephew, Tommy. The kid had worked at Whitmore Industries for a few months last year, down in their warehouse. Tommy used to complain about the computer systems, about how the timestamps on his work orders never matched up with the actual time, especially during certain weeks of the year. Tommy had lost that job eventually, caught in a round of layoffs that had nothing to do with his performance and everything to do with corporate cost-cutting. Robert's hand was on the door handle when he stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his back to the room, listening to these 10 brilliant lawyers struggling with a problem that suddenly seemed so obvious to him. How many times had he seen situations like this? How many times had he noticed things that others missed only to keep quiet because nobody wanted to hear from the cleaning guy? He thought about those 15 years of being invisible. 15 years of watching and listening and learning but never speaking up. 15 years of knowing his place, staying in his lane, making sure not to bother the important people. But this was different. This wasn't about him. This was about $400 million in 2 companies and all the regular people who worked at those companies. People like Tommy, people like him. People whose jobs and lives depended on things working out the right way. Robert turned around. His heart was beating faster than usual. His palms felt sweaty. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said quietly. Nobody heard him. The lawyers kept talking, their voices overlapping as they debated various theories and strategies. "Excuse me," Robert said again, a little louder this time. One of the younger lawyers glanced his way, then looked back at his laptop. But Catherine Henderson heard something in Robert's voice that made her hold up her hand, silencing the room. "Yes?" she said, her tone polite but clearly impatient. "Did you need something?" 10 pairs of eyes turned to look at Robert. He felt his face get warm. This was a mistake. These people didn't want to hear from him. They had law degrees and years of experience and probably cost their clients $1,000 an hour. What did he have? A high school diploma and calloused hands from pushing a mop. But he'd come this far, might as well finish what he started. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Robert said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I know you're busy and this is private and all, but I couldn't help hearing about your problem with the timestamps." Catherine's eyebrow raised slightly. A few of the other lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a man in an expensive suit, actually smirked like this was amusing. "We appreciate your concern," Catherine said carefully. "But this is a very complex legal matter. We really need to focus here." "Yes, ma'am, I understand that. I'll be out of your way in just a minute." Robert tightened his grip on the trash bag he was holding. "It's just that, well, did anyone think to check about daylight saving time?" The room went completely silent. It was like someone had hit a pause button on the whole world. The lawyer stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to something that might have been annoyance. "Daylight saving time?" repeated one of the lawyers slowly, like he was trying to figure out if Robert was serious or making some kind of joke. "Yes, sir. You know, when we spring forward and fall back, change the clocks." Robert felt foolish now, stating something so obvious, but he pressed on. "I used to work at a manufacturing plant before this job. Worked there for 20 years, actually. Started on the floor. Worked my way up to supervisor before the place shut down." "That's very interesting," Catherine said, though her tone suggested it wasn't interesting at all. "But I'm not sure what that has to do with our case." "Well, ma'am, at the plant we had these big computer systems. Servers, they called them. Controlled everything from inventory to production schedules to timesheets. And every year, twice a year, we'd have the same problem during daylight saving time. Now he had their attention. Not all of them, but a few were actually listening instead of just waiting for him to leave." "What kind of problem?" asked one of the lawyers, a woman with red hair who'd been quiet most of the night. "The servers wouldn't switch over right away," Robert explained. "See, changing the time on those big systems could mess things up. Production schedules would get confused. Inventory counts would be off, all sorts of issues. So the IT folks would wait a few days, sometimes even a week, before they updated the time on the servers. They'd run through the change during a planned maintenance window when it wouldn't disrupt operations." "I still don't see what this has to do with our case," the smirking lawyer said. "We're talking about patent filings and computer hacks, not factory production schedules." But Catherine Henderson had gone very still. Her eyes were locked on Robert, and he could almost see her mind working, putting pieces together. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. Robert took a breath. "I'm suggesting that maybe Whitmore Industries delayed their daylight saving time update on their servers. If they did, then their computer system would have been an hour behind the real time. So when their logs say the hack happened at 4:05 p.m., the actual time might have been 5:05 p.m. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confused silence or impatient silence. This was the silence of 10 very smart people, suddenly realizing they might have missed something incredibly simple and incredibly important. The woman with red hair grabbed her laptop and started typing furiously. "March 15th, 2023, she muttered. "When did DST happen that year?" "March 12th. Another lawyer answered immediately, already pulling up a calendar on his phone. Second Sunday in March, like always. So if Whitmore delayed their server update, Catherine said slowly, standing up from her chair, their systems would have still been on standard time when the hack occurred 3 days later. Which means, the young lawyer continued, his eyes going wide. When their server logged the hack at 4:05 p.m., it was actually 5:05 p.m. real time. More than an hour after Chen filed their patent, the room erupted. Lawyers started talking all at once, pulling up documents, checking dates, calculating timelines. Someone was already on the phone, trying to reach Whitmore's IT department even though it was nearly midnight. Another was searching through old emails for any mention of server maintenance schedules. Robert stood by the door, still holding his trash bag, watching the chaos he'd just unleashed. Part of him wanted to slip out quietly and finish his cleaning route. But another part of him, a part that had been silent for 15 years, wanted to stay and see if he was actually right. Catherine Henderson walked toward him, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She had a strange expression on her face, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "What's your name?" she asked. "Robert, ma'am." "Robert Webb." "Robert Webb," she repeated, extending her hand. "I've walked past you probably 1,000 times in this building, and I don't think I've ever asked your name. That's shameful of me." Robert shook her hand, surprised by how firm her grip was. "It's okay, ma'am. People get busy." "No," Catherine said. "It's not okay, and please stop calling me ma'am. I'm Catherine." She turned back to her team. "Jennifer, did you reach anyone at Whitmore yet?" The red-haired woman held up her phone triumphantly. "Got their IT director on the line. He sounds annoyed, but he's checking their maintenance records right now." Everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath. The IT director must have been saying something because Jennifer's eyes kept getting wider and wider. Finally, she lowered the phone. "They delayed the DST update," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Ran it on March 18th during a planned maintenance window because they were in the middle of a critical production cycle. Their servers were 3 days behind on the time change." The room exploded again, but louder this time. Lawyers were hugging each other, punching the air, laughing with relief and disbelief. Someone actually shouted in celebration, and Robert, standing by the door with his cleaning cart and his trash bag, allowed himself a small smile. Maybe being invisible for 15 years had been worth it after all. Robert stood there with his cleaning cart, one hand on the handle, frozen halfway to the door. His heart was pounding in his chest. For 15 years, he'd kept his mouth shut. For 15 years, he'd been the invisible man, the guy who cleaned up after everyone else and never said a word. That was the safe thing to do. That was how you kept your job when you were 62 years old and didn't have a lot of other options. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was because he'd been listening to these lawyers struggle for 3 nights in a row. Maybe it was because he actually knew something that could help. Or maybe, just maybe, he was tired of being invisible. He turned around slowly. The lawyers were still talking, still arguing, still going in circles about timestamps and patents and things that didn't make sense. Catherine Henderson had her head in her hands, looking more defeated than Robert had ever seen anyone look. "Excuse me," Robert said quietly. Nobody heard him. They kept talking, voices overlapping, frustration building. "Excuse me," he said again, a little louder this time. One of the younger lawyers glanced his way with an annoyed expression, like Robert was interrupting something important, which, to be fair, he was. "We're in a confidential meeting here," the lawyer said, turning back to the group. Robert could feel his courage starting to slip away. This was a mistake. These people didn't want to hear from him. They probably thought he couldn't even read, much less help them with a $400 million lawsuit. But then he thought about his nephew, Tommy. Tommy had worked at Whitmore Industries for 2 years before they laid him off last spring. Good kid, hard worker. Lost his job anyway when the company started having money problems. If Chen Technologies really had stolen from Whitmore, then maybe Tommy and all those other workers wouldn't have lost their jobs. Maybe that mattered more than Robert's fear of speaking up. "I couldn't help but overhear," Robert said, his voice stronger now. "About your timestamp problem." The room went completely silent. 10 pairs of eyes turned to look at him, and Robert suddenly felt very small and very old. Catherine Henderson's perfectly styled eyebrow went up in an expression that was half surprise, half irritation. "I appreciate your concern," she said in that tone people use when they're trying to be polite but really want you to go away. "But this is a complex legal matter. We really can't discuss it with anyone outside the firm. Yes, ma'am, I understand that, Robert said. His hands were sweating. He wiped them on his work pants. I'll be out of your way in just a minute. It's just... Did anyone check if Whitmore Industries was on daylight saving time? The lawyer stared at him like he'd just started speaking a foreign language. Catherine tilted her head slightly, confusion replacing the irritation on her face. What are you talking about? Asked Jennifer, one of the associates. She was the one with glasses who'd suggested asking for another delay earlier. Robert shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. But he'd come this far. Might as well finish. Well, I worked at a manufacturing plant for 20 years before I took this job, he explained. Pierce Manufacturing out in Gary, Indiana. We had big computer systems, server rooms, the whole setup. And every year when daylight saving time came around, we had problems. What kind of problems? David, the young lawyer with the laptop, was actually paying attention now. The servers, Robert said. See, most companies. They update their computer clocks automatically when DST hits. Spring forward, fall back, all that. But in manufacturing plants, especially the big ones running 24-hour production schedules, they can't afford to have their systems go down, even for a minute. So a lot of times they delay the time change on their servers. The room was completely silent now. Every lawyer was staring at Robert with varying expressions of confusion, interest, and in Catherine's case, dawning realization. Go on, Catherine said slowly. Well, if Whitmore delayed updating their servers for DST, Robert continued, gaining confidence as he spoke, then their server clocks would be running an hour behind the real time. So when their system logged that theft at 4:05 p.m., the actual real-world time would have been 5:05 p.m. He could see the wheels turning in their heads, see them doing the math, see them starting to understand. That would mean, Jennifer said slowly, that the document was actually stolen at 5:05 p.m. real time, not 4:05 p.m. And Chen filed their patent at 3:47 p.m., David added, his fingers already flying across his laptop keyboard. Which would be more than an hour after the theft actually happened, Catherine finished. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Oh my God, the conference room exploded with activity. It was like someone had lit a fire under all 10 lawyers at once. David was pulling up calendar information on his laptop. Jennifer had her phone out and was frantically scrolling through contacts. 2 other lawyers were searching through the boxes of documents on the side table, looking for something specific. When did DST take effect in 2023? Catherine demanded. March 12th, David called out, still typing. Second Sunday in March, that's the rule. And the theft was March 15th, Jennifer added. 3 days later. Someone call Whitmore's IT department right now, Catherine ordered. I don't care that it's almost 1 in the morning. Wake them up if you have to. We need to know if they delayed their DST server update. Jennifer was already dialing, her hands shaking slightly with excitement or nerves, or maybe both. Getting the IT director's cell number from their main office emergency contact list, she said. Robert stood there, still holding onto his cleaning cart, watching the chaos he'd just unleashed. Part of him wanted to slip out quietly now, before they remembered he was there, but another part of him, a part he'd forgotten existed, wanted to see this through. You, Catherine said, pointing at Robert. She walked over to him, and he noticed she was nearly as tall as he was in her heels. What did you say your name was? Robert Webb, ma'am. Robert Webb, she repeated like she was memorizing it. How long have you worked here? 15 years. Something passed across her face then. Shame maybe, or embarrassment. 15 years, and I've never once asked your name or introduced myself. I'm Catherine Henderson. She held out her hand. Robert looked at it for a second, surprised, then shook it. Her grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone used to closing important deals. I've got the IT director on the line, Jennifer suddenly shouted from across the room, putting him on speaker. A groggy male voice came through the phone, confused and half asleep. Hello, this is Bill Morrison. Who is this, and why are you calling me at 1 in the morning? Mr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Henderson and Associates. I'm so sorry to wake you, but this is extremely urgent. I need to ask you about your server systems in March of 2023. My what? Can't this wait until tomorrow? No, sir, I'm afraid it can't. We're 3 days from trial and this could change everything. Please, I need you to check your records. On March 15th, 2023, were your servers still running on standard time or had they been updated to daylight saving time? There was a long pause. Robert could hear the IT director moving around, probably getting out of bed, maybe turning on a computer. "Let me check the maintenance logs," Bill said. "Give me a minute." That minute felt like an hour. The conference room was so quiet Robert could hear his own heartbeat. All 10 lawyers were frozen, staring at the speakerphone in the middle of the table like it was about to reveal the secrets of the universe. "Okay," Bill finally said. "I've got the records pulled up. March 15th, 2023, yeah, we were still on standard time." "You're absolutely certain?" Catherine asked, moving closer to the phone. "Positive. We delayed the DST update that year because we were running a critical production cycle. We couldn't afford any system interruptions. We didn't update the servers until March 18th, 3 days later. It's all documented right here in the maintenance logs." The room erupted. Lawyers were high-fiving, shouting, laughing. David was already pulling up new documents and recalculating timelines. Jennifer was asking Bill Morrison to send over the official maintenance records immediately. Catherine turned to Robert with an expression he couldn't quite read. Wonder maybe, or disbelief. "So the theft was logged at 4:05 p.m. on Whitmore's servers," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "But their servers were running an hour behind, which means the actual theft happened at 5:05 p.m. real time. A full hour and 18 minutes after Chen filed their patent at 3:47 p.m. They stole it first, then filed the patent," David said, grinning from ear to ear. "We can prove it now. We can actually prove it." Robert started to push his cart toward the door again. He'd done what he came to do. Time to get back to being invisible. "Wait," Catherine said sharply. "Don't you dare leave yet." Robert stopped, worried for a moment that he was in trouble. But when Catherine walked over to him, she was smiling. Actually smiling. "Do you understand what you just did?" she asked. Robert shrugged. "Just mentioned something I remembered from my old job, that's all." "That's all?" Catherine laughed, and it was a sound of pure relief. "Robert, 10 lawyers have been working on this case for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of 12-hour days, weekends, endless research. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on expert witnesses and consultants and investigators. And you just solved it in 5 minutes." "Well," Robert said modestly, "sometimes it helps to look at things from a different angle." And for the first time in 15 years, Robert Webb felt like somebody actually saw him. Robert tried to leave 3 more times in the next hour, and each time Catherine or one of the other lawyers pulled him back. They had questions. So many questions. How did he know about DST delays? Had he seen this problem before? What else did he remember about server systems in manufacturing plants? It was almost 3 in the morning now, and Robert's normal shift had ended an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to walk out. Not when these lawyers were looking at him like he'd just handed them a winning lottery ticket. Besides, there was something exciting happening here. Something important. And for once in his life, he was right in the middle of it instead of watching from the sidelines. Okay, David said, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep but shining with energy. "Let's make sure we have this absolutely right before we get too excited." He pulled up a timeline on the big screen, color-coded and detailed. Robert had to admit these lawyers might have missed the obvious answer, but once they had it, they knew exactly what to do with it. March 15th, 2023, David began, using a laser pointer to highlight dates. Daylight saving time had already taken effect on March 12th. Most of the country, most companies had already sprung forward. But Whitmore Industries delayed their server update until March 18th. Why would they do that? Asked one of the lawyers Robert didn't know the name of. Seems risky. It's actually pretty common in manufacturing, Robert spoke up, then felt embarrassed when everyone turned to look at him again. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, please, Catherine said, gesturing for him to continue. This is your area of expertise, apparently. Robert cleared his throat. Well, when you're running production lines 24/7, you can't just shut everything down to update computer systems. Even a few minutes of downtime can cost thousands of dollars in lost production. So a lot of plants schedule their DST updates for planned maintenance windows, which might be days or even weeks after the official time change. That makes sense, Jennifer said, writing notes frantically. And we have Bill Morrison's confirmation that Whitmore did exactly that in 2023. Right, David continued, moving his laser pointer. So on March 15th at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Chen Technologies filed their patent application. That's locked in the Federal Patent Office records. No dispute there. But here's where it gets good, Catherine said, and Robert noticed she was smiling, really smiling. not the fake professional smile he'd seen her use with clients. At 4:05 p.m., according to Whitmore's server logs, someone from Chen's network accessed Whitmore's confidential files and downloaded their manufacturing process documentation. Except that 4:05 p.m. was server time, Jennifer added. Standard time. The real world had already moved to daylight saving time 3 days earlier. Which means, David said, and Robert could hear the triumph in his voice. The actual real-world time of the theft was 5:05 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, a full hour and 18 minutes after Chen filed their patent. The room went quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed what that meant. Then one of the other lawyers, a guy with gray hair and tired eyes, spoke up. So they didn't steal the information and then file the patent, he said slowly. They filed the patent first and then stole the information afterward. But why? Asked another lawyer. That doesn't make any sense. Why file a patent and then steal the same information? Robert had been thinking about this for the last hour, turning it over in his mind while the lawyers did their legal work. Maybe they wanted to make sure their patent was filed first, he suggested. Get it on record. But then they realized they needed the actual detailed process to make it work. So they went back and stole it. Catherine snapped her fingers and pointed at Robert. That's exactly right. Chen filed a preliminary patent application based on whatever information they already had, maybe from a former Whitmore employee or corporate espionage. But the application was incomplete, missing critical details. So they hacked Whitmore's servers to get the complete process. And because of the timestamp confusion, we thought the theft happened before the patent filing, David said. So we couldn't prove the connection. But now we can prove they filed an incomplete patent, then immediately stole the complete information, and submitted amendments to their patent application using the stolen data. Catherine finished. She turned to Jennifer. Pull up Chen's patent file. When did they file their first amendment? Jennifer's fingers flew across her keyboard. March 18, 2023, 3 days after the theft. Perfect, Catherine said. Absolutely perfect. They stole the information on March 15th at 5:05 p.m. real time, spent 3 days incorporating it into their design, and filed the amendment on March 18th. The conference room felt electric now, charged with an energy that Robert had never experienced before. These lawyers had been defeated, exhausted, ready to give up just a few hours ago. Now they were like hunters who'd just spotted their prey. We need to rework every single document, Catherine said, shifting into command mode. Every brief, every exhibit, every timeline. David, I want you and Michael to handle the technical documentation. Jennifer, you're on the legal briefs. Tom, start preparing updated exhibits for trial. What about the judge? Someone asked. Do we need to notify him about the new evidence? First thing Monday morning, Catherine said. We'll file an emergency motion to submit additional evidence. Judge Morrison isn't going to like it this close to trial, but when he sees what we have, he'll understand. What about Chen's lawyers? Jennifer asked. They're going to fight this hard. Let them fight, Catherine said with confidence Robert had never heard before. We have server logs, maintenance records, IT director testimony, and now a timeline that actually makes sense. Plus, we have Chen's own patent filing, showing they amended their application 3 days after the theft. The evidence tells the story. Robert watched them work, dividing up tasks, pulling documents, making phone calls. It was organized chaos, but there was a purpose to it, a direction. They knew what they were doing now. David suddenly stopped typing and looked up. Wait, there's more. He pulled up another document on the screen. Remember we had those network access logs that showed someone from Chen's company accessing Whitmore's database at 5:23 p.m. on March 15th? Yeah, Catherine said. We couldn't use them because we thought the patent was filed at 3:47 p.m., after the theft at 4:05 p.m. The 5:23 p.m. access didn't fit our timeline, so we ignored it. But now it does fit, David said, excitement building in his voice. The theft happened at 5:05 p.m. real time. The 5:23 p.m. access was 18 minutes later, same day. They were still in Whitmore's system, still downloading files. Can you prove it's the same intrusion? Catherine asked. Give me 10 minutes, David said, already pulling up network logs and technical reports. Robert glanced at the clock. It was 3:30 in the morning. He'd been here for almost 4 hours past his normal quitting time. His back hurt from standing so long and he was exhausted, but he couldn't leave, not now. Robert, Catherine said, and he realized she'd been watching him. You should go home. You've done more than enough, more than we could ever thank you for. I'd like to stay, Robert said, if that's okay. I want to see how this turns out. Catherine studied him for a moment, then nodded. Pull up a chair. You're part of the team now. Part of the team. Robert had worked at this law firm for 15 years, and nobody had ever said those words to him before. He wasn't just the janitor anymore, invisible and ignored. He was part of something important. He pulled up a chair at the big conference table right next to Catherine Henderson herself. One of the lawyers brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. Another one moved some papers so he'd have space to sit comfortably. For the next 2 hours, Robert watched them work. He didn't understand half of what they were doing, all the legal language and technical terms, but he understood the energy in the room. These people were building something, creating a case that would hold up in court and prove that Whitmore Industries had been wronged, and it was all because he'd spoken up. Because he'd remembered something from 20 years ago, from a different life, and had the courage to mention it even though he was terrified they'd laugh at him or tell him to mind his own business. Got it, David finally announced, breaking the focused silence. The 5:23 p.m. network access used the same credentials, same IP address, same entry method as the 5:05 p.m. theft. It's definitely the same hack, same person, continuing to download additional files. How many files total? Catherine asked. 76, David said. They downloaded 76 separate documents from Whitmore's secure server over an 18-minute period. Everything from manufacturing specifications to quality control, procedures to supply chain information, and Chen's patent amendment filed 3 days later included information from, Jennifer prompted, 68 of those. 76 files, David finished. I can match the specific data points. The connection is undeniable. Catherine stood up and walked to the window. The sun was just starting to come up over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She stood there for a long moment, and Robert wondered what she was thinking. We're going to win this case, she finally said, turning back to face the room. Thanks to Robert Webb, a janitor who paid attention to the world around him even when nobody was paying attention to him. She walked over to where Robert sat and put her hand on his shoulder. You saved this case. You saved Whitmore Industries, and you probably saved this law firm's reputation. I don't know how we can ever thank you properly. Robert felt his eyes getting wet and he blinked hard. Just doing what I could to help, he managed to say. No, Catherine said firmly. You did what 10 expensive lawyers couldn't do in 6 weeks. You solved the unsolvable, and we're never going to forget it. As the sun rose over Chicago and the lawyers continued working on their case, Robert sat at that conference table and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like he mattered. 3 days later, Robert found himself sitting in a courtroom for the first time in his life. Catherine had insisted he be there, said he deserved to see how his discovery played out. So there he was, in the back row of the gallery, wearing his best Sunday suit that he'd pulled out of the closet and ironed the night before. The courtroom was impressive, all dark wood and high ceilings, with an American flag in the corner and the judge's bench elevated above everyone else. Robert felt small in there, out of place, like he'd wandered into somewhere he didn't belong. But Catherine had turned around twice to smile at him, and that made him feel a little better. Chen Technologies lawyers looked confident as they took their seats. They were an army of expensive suits and leather briefcases, probably charging $1,000 an hour each. They'd spent the last 6 weeks thinking they had this case won because of that timeline problem. They had no idea what was coming. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone stood. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that looked like they didn't miss much. He settled into his chair and looked over the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. We have a motion to consider before we begin jury selection, the judge said. Ms. Henderson, I understand you have new evidence to present. Catherine stood up, and Robert noticed she stood differently than she had 3 nights ago. Taller, more confident, like someone holding a royal flush in a poker game. Yes, Your Honor. 3 days ago, we discovered critical information that fundamentally changes the timeline of this case. Information that proves Chen Technologies not only stole from Whitmore Industries, but attempted to cover their tracks using the confusion around daylight saving time. The Chen lawyers looked at each other with confused expressions. Their lead attorney, a man with silver hair and an expensive watch, stood up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We're 3 days from trial. The defense can't simply introduce new evidence at the last minute. It's not new evidence, Your Honor, Catherine said calmly. It's a new understanding of existing evidence. Evidence that was available to both parties all along, but that we only recently understood how to interpret correctly. I'll hear it, Judge Morrison said. But Ms. Henderson, this better be good. I don't appreciate last-minute surprises. I understand, Your Honor. If I may approach with exhibits? For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. The DST delay at Whitmore Industries, the maintenance logs showing their servers were still on standard time on March 15th. The IT director's testimony confirming the timeline. The recalculated timestamps showing the theft actually happened at 5:05 p.m., not 4:05 p.m. The network access logs at 5:23 p.m. showing the continued intrusion. The 76 downloaded files. The patent amendment 3 days later that incorporated 68 of those files. Robert watched Chen's lawyers realize what was happening. Their confident expressions slowly transformed into shock, then worry, then barely concealed panic. They whispered urgently to each other, flipping through their own documents, trying to find some way to counter what Catherine was presenting. Your Honor, the silver-haired lawyer said, standing up again, even if the plaintiff's new timeline is accurate, it doesn't prove that Chen Technologies stole anything. The network access could have been legitimate. From an IP address traced to Chen's engineering department, Catherine replied smoothly. Using credentials that were obtained through a phishing attack, documented by Whitmore's cybersecurity firm. At 5:05 p.m. on March 15th, 18 minutes after Chen filed their patent and continuing for 18 minutes while 76 confidential files were downloaded, files that appeared nearly word for word in Chen's patent amendment 3 days later, she paused, looking directly at Chen's lawyers. The timing isn't coincidental. It's calculated. Chen filed a preliminary patent application, realized they didn't have enough detail to make it work, immediately hacked Whitmore's servers to steal the complete process, and then amended their patent using the stolen information. The DST confusion was just lucky for them, or so they thought. Judge Morrison had been reading through the exhibits while Catherine spoke. He looked up now and Robert could see he wasn't happy. Mr. Patterson, he said to Chen's lead attorney, do you have a response to this? Patterson stood up, but Robert could see the man was scrambling. Your Honor, we need time to review this new interpretation of the timeline. We request a continuance to properly examine the plaintiff's claims. A continuance? Judge Morrison's eyebrows went up. You've denied the plaintiff's request for continuances twice, Mr. Patterson. You insisted we move forward with trial this week. And now you want a delay? The circumstances have changed, Your Honor. The circumstances haven't changed, the judge said coldly. The evidence hasn't changed. Only the understanding of that evidence has changed. And from what I can see here, Ms. Henderson's timeline is supported by documentation from Whitmore's IT department, federal patent records, and network security logs. What exactly do you need time to review? Patterson didn't have an answer for that. He sat down slowly and Robert saw him lean over to whisper something to his client. The CEO of Chen Technologies, a thin man in a navy suit, had gone pale. Your Honor, Catherine said, given the strength of this evidence, I believe Chen Technologies might want to consider settlement discussions before we proceed to trial. The facts are clear. The timeline is clear. The theft is documented, and the attempted cover-up through patent filing is obvious. Judge Morrison nodded. Mr. Patterson, I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Henderson. This looks very bad for your client. I'm going to give you until tomorrow morning to discuss this with Chen Technologies. If you want to pursue settlement, now would be the time. If not, we'll proceed to trial, and I'll allow all of Ms. Henderson's timeline evidence. The judge stood and everyone else stood with him. As he left the courtroom, Robert could see Chen's lawyers surrounding their client, talking urgently. The CEO looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Catherine walked back to where Robert sat and she was grinning. That went well, she said quietly. Does this mean Whitmore wins? Robert asked. Not yet, Catherine said. But I'd bet my career that Chen settles before tomorrow morning. They don't want this going to trial now. Not with this timeline. A jury would destroy them, she was right. At 8:30 that evening, Robert's phone rang. It was Catherine. They settled, she said, and he could hear the exhaustion and triumph in her voice. $380 million. Chen admits no wrongdoing officially, but they're paying almost the full amount Whitmore was asking for. It's over, Robert. We won. Robert sat down heavily on his couch, suddenly feeling all of his 62 years. "That's good," he managed to say. "That's real good. Robert, I need you to come to the office tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock. Can you do that?" "I work nights, so yeah, I can come in." "Good. I'll see you then." The next afternoon, Robert took the elevator up to the 47th floor, still not quite sure why Catherine wanted to see him. Maybe just to say thank you officially. That would be nice. He'd never really been thanked for anything at this job before. But when he walked into the conference room, there were about 30 people there. Lawyers from the firm, but also people he didn't recognize. Catherine was at the head of the table and she smiled when she saw him. "Robert, come in. These are the executives from Whitmore Industries. They wanted to meet you." A woman in her 50s with kind eyes stood up and walked over to him. "Mr. Webb, I'm Patricia Whitmore. My grandfather founded Whitmore Industries 70 years ago. Because of you, the company he built is going to survive. I can't tell you what that means to our family, to our employees, to everyone who depends on us." She handed him an envelope. "This is from the board of directors. It's not nearly enough to repay what you've done, but we hope it helps." Robert opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check. He had to count the zeros twice to make sure he was reading it right. $50,000. "I can't accept this," he said automatically, trying to hand it back. "Yes, you can," Patricia said firmly. "You saved our company, Mr. Webb. 50,000 is nothing compared to what you gave us. Please take it. Pay off your house, take a vacation, do something nice for yourself." Catherine spoke up from across the room. "That's not all. The firm's partners met this morning. Robert, we'd like to offer you a new position. Not as a janitor. As a consultant." Robert stared at her. "A consultant? I don't understand." "We realize something," Catherine said. "We have 50 lawyers in this firm, all with fancy degrees from expensive schools. But we don't have anyone who's actually worked in the industries our clients come from. Manufacturing, logistics, retail, construction. You have 20 years of experience in manufacturing. That's valuable. Real-world valuable. We want to hire you to review cases," Jennifer added, "especially cases involving manufacturing or industrial clients. You'd read the documents, sit in on meetings, and tell us if we're missing something obvious. Tell us what someone who actually worked in the field would see." "It would be part-time," Catherine said. "Maybe 20 hours a week. You could keep your night job if you want, or you could do this full-time. Either way, we'd pay you consultant rates, $75 an hour to start." Robert did the math quickly in his head. 20 hours a week at $75 an hour. That was more than he made in a month as a janitor. "I don't have a college degree," he said quietly. "We don't care," Catherine replied. "Oh."